With the transgender conversation going on, I think there are a number of things that Christians ought to make sure that we understand. One of those is what the Bible teaches about male and female. There is a cultural moment that would say that male and female categories are essentially arbitrary, and they can be transcended. In a biblical understanding, Genesis teaches us that humanity is created as male and female, that we can't transcend that that's part of what it means to be creatures before God, and that maleness and femaleness are good aspects of the created order. We ought to understand that. We ought to make sure that we're teaching that. But in order to do that, there are several things that we have to understand. One of those things is we can't rely on culturally conditioned stereotypes of what it means to be a man or a woman. Sometimes it's easy just to come in and say, here's what men are like, here's what women are like, in ways that are not reflected so much by Scripture as by all of the cultural expectations that people have of what masculinity and femininity are about. If we do that, what we're going to end up doing is actually pushing people toward the transgender movement. Because if you have a young girl who's in a congregation, she doesn't like princesses and those sorts of girly things. She likes to ride the four-wheeler with her dad. She likes to watch football. She likes to all of these things, and she hears that in order to be a girl or in order to be a woman, she has to fit into this stereotype. Then she's going to assume, well, am I not a woman? And the same thing would happen with a little boy. When in reality, in Scripture, there are certain characteristics of men, certain characteristics of women, but those things are remarkably complex compared to cultural stereotypes. David is a warrior and a harpist. Mary is quiet and submissive to the will of God in Luke 1 and 2. She also is singing a war hymn in Luke 1 and is a mighty warrior in Revelation 12 who is fighting against the dragon. And so you don't have those very flat understandings of maleness and femaleness in Scripture in terms of the stereotypes. But also to recognize that when you're dealing with your transgender neighbors, that these are not enemies to be destroyed, and these are not freaks. Sometimes I think that there's a tendency in American life, even among very secular people, to almost laugh at people who would say, I am a man biologically, but I feel myself to be a woman, or a woman who says, I'm a woman biologically, but I've always thought of myself as a man. These are not freaks. These are people created in the image of God, and they're people who are bearing very, very heavy burdens. And so we don't need to accept the illusion that, well, by self-identifying as something else, or by using technology to try to construct a different identity, you can circumvent those sorts of burdens that you're bearing in order to say, we understand you really are bearing a deep burden. And we ought to understand that. I mean, we're the people who know from Genesis 1 through 3 that all of us are alienated from some aspect of our createdness or the other. These are our neighbors who are experiencing that, particularly in terms of who they're created to be as male or female. So our responsibility is to say, we love you, and we're going to, Galatians 6, help bear those burdens together. And so that means you're going to have a situation where you may have a woman who needs other women in the congregation to affirm aspects of femininity in her and to help disciple her over the long period of her life, recognizing that this may be a struggle that she has right up until the point that she's in the presence of Jesus. She needs people to help her with that. You may have a man who says, I don't even know what it means to be a man, who has other men in the congregation who don't dismiss him, who don't look down on him, but who find those places of masculinity that are there, encourage those things, and move those things forward. That's what we really need in our congregations, where you don't have people who, when they're experiencing this sort of confusion or this sort of sense of alienation, they don't think, well, if I talk about this, this means I have to leave the church and no one's going to understand what I'm talking about. No, we think that the gospel's big enough to address anything, including this.